I took out all my winter clothes, folded them neatly, and was putting them into the suitcase suddenly. The door of the house was opened, and a person crept over. A pair of big hands came from behind and covered my eyes with cold fingers. "Guess who I am?" He deliberately lowered his voice, which was magnetic and deep. Just like every time he came back from a business trip and played around with me in the past, I would smile and say, "Of course it's my Julian," and then lovingly warm his hands for him. But now, I no longer have that sweet feeling, nor do I have the mood to play with him. I directly pulled his hand away and continued to fold the clothes with my head down. My boyfriend Julian was a bit stunned. He clenched his cold fingers into a fist, then lowered his eyes and eyebrows, looking as pitiful as a puppy caught in the rain as he asked, "Ava, what's wrong with you? Isn't a month of Cold War with me enough?" I had to explain to the guests for a long time after you suddenly burst into the wedding venue before. A sarcastic smile tugged at the corner of my lips. A month ago, I became the laughingstock of all my relatives and friends. Because my groom married someone else in public. My mother had a heart attack because of this, and I was driven out of the venue in a sorry state by Julian like a beggar until the day my mother was buried. Everyone in the village was still pointing at me with mockery on their faces. "It's her husband ran away on the wedding day? And she's a top student. She's almost 30 and still single. It's really embarrassing." I heard she even angered her mother to death. I've always said that having a daughter is useless. She can't provide for the elderly. The damp and stuffy feeling when my mother was buried wrapped around me again. But my tears had already dried up coming back to my senses. I said lightly, "It's not a Cold War." I was about to say, "Let's break up," before these 5 words could be spoken. Julian nodded, let out a long, "oh" sound, and said inferently, "It's not a Cold War. You're arguing with me, right? Didn't I send you a message to explain? Olivia's husband ran away. Our 2 families have been friends for generations. Helping her won't cost us a piece of meat." Then he sat down on the sofa like a lord, casually picked up a gray-white sweater, and clumsily helped me fold it with his head down under his messy bangs. His handsome brows were slightly furrowed, and his thin lips twitched imperceptibly. "This sweater looks so ugly, you might as well throw it away." I didn't say anything, just stared blankly at the silver wedding ring on his ring finger. Only then did I realize what that particularly cold touch on my eyelids was just now. Julian followed my gaze, quickly took off the ring like a guilty person, and put it in his pocket. And he blinked, trying to muddle through as before. "When acting, you have to go all the way. I forgot to take it off Fava. You jealous little thing, you're not angry again, are you?" In fact, I wasn't angry at all. I just suddenly remembered. When he proposed to me at the dining table, he reached out his hand and asked me if I would marry him, without even preparing a wedding ring. He said he forgot and didn't like the feeling of being bound by a ring. He would make it up on the wedding day and buy me a customized DR ring. But in the end, he put that customized ring perfectly on Olivia's finger. He, who hated being bound, happily wore the wedding ring and was reluctant to take it off. Angry? I would never be angry again in this past month. I had masochistic ally watched the news reports of Julian and Olivia on their honeymoon, traveling around the world, and my heart was completely unperturbed. I moved my eyes away. Didn't reply, just took back the sweater in his hand and said lightly, "This is a wool sweater my mother knitted for me with her own hands." Julian's hand suddenly felt empty. He was already a bit unhappy, pursed his lips slightly, but still suppressed his anger and said gently, "By the way, how is Auntie's health? After a month of recuperation, she should be almost recovered, right?" He smiled, his eyes curving. "Originally, I thought the venue for our wedding was too small and wronged you. Taking this opportunity, we can set a new date and have a luxurious wedding to make Auntie happy." I knew that Julian was in a good enough mood today, and had given me many chances to back down. If I didn't, he would surely throw a tantrum like a young master again. But he forgot. On the day we were supposed to get the marriage certificate, he went to the Civil Affairs Bureau and said he forgot to bring his household register. And he turned around and accompanied Olivia, whose fiancé was absent, to try on wedding dresses. We didn't get the certificate at all. And there was no need for any wedding. Coming back to my senses, I just gave a sad smile. There's no need. Being coldly treated by me several times, Julian's face suddenly turned gloomy. He was about to speak when his phone rang. When he saw the name, Olivia, on the screen, his eyes and brows relaxed, and his voice was incredibly gentle. I just got home, why are you calling? I don't know what was said on the other end of the phone. He held the phone between his neck and shoulder, picked up the black windbreaker on the coat rack, and smiled. Olivia, you're pushing your luck. I'm still coaxing my girlfriend. This is the last time. Though. I watched as he skillfully put on the ring, adjusted his collar and hairstyle in front of the full-length mirror, picked up the car keys, and was about to leave. When his hand was on the doorknob, he seemed to remember me, so he quickly turned around, rubbed my hair with his big hand, and said affectionately, "Okay, Ava. Stop making trouble. I bought you a little gift. I'll bring it to you tonight." I watched him leave, then turned and walked to the French window. Through the glass, having fulfilled my "I'm sorry," I saw a pink sports car parked downstairs. Its chassis was so low that it seemed to be lying on the ground. Olivia was leaning against the car door, drinking milk tea with gusto. And Julian, who was always a clean freak, skillfully lowered his head, took a sip of the milk tea through the straw Olivia had used, and then got into the driver's seat. I didn't look anymore and pulled the curtains. Turning around, I picked up the expatriate application form on the desk that I had filled out all the information for a long time ago. Rubbing the sharp edge of the application form, I didn't hesitate to go out, take a taxi, and head to the company. After a day of packing, it was already evening. I had applied for expatriation on the system 2 days ago, and it had been approved now. I just needed to submit the paper information for filing. In the company, everyone was whispering about me. Is this the person who made a scene at Julian's wedding at the headquarters in the video? Oh, didn't she take a bereavement leave and run away some time ago? How dare she come back now? I think she might be here to resign. He's been in the company for 10 years and is still just a team leader. It said that she applied for promotion 5 times but wasn't approved. She's really useless. These harsh remarks had once made me feel down, but now I was indifferent. After all, during the time I was arranging my mother's funeral, I had heard too many similar sarcasms. I looked straight ahead and knocked on the door of the female boss Lucas's office. "Come in." Lucas looked at the form in my hand, nodded, and said with satisfaction, "Ava, I didn't believe you when you told me you wanted to be expatriated 2 days ago. Before, when I asked you to be expatriated, you said you wanted to accompany your boyfriend and didn't want a long-distance relationship this time. You're quite decisive. The headquarters will send someone to inspect the expatriation situation tomorrow. Come to the company again tomorrow to show your face, and then you can leave. Come to think of it, we were interns at the same time. You're more capable than me and have helped me a lot now that you've finally figured it out. It's quite good." I lowered my eyes. Yes, perhaps it's bad luck. The interns who joined at the same time as me have all become senior executives, while I've been stuck in the same place walking out of the company. I looked back at the skyscraper where I'd struggled for 10 years. In these 10 years, Julian's family company has grown stronger and stronger. Even the office buildings of its branches have reached the sky. But why did my relationship with Julian collapse instead? My encounter with Julian was a typical story of a young master and a Cinderella. My father passed away early, and I was raised by my mother. At that time, apart from attending classes, I squeezed out almost every minute to work part-time and substitute teach for others. Until a girl not only owed me the substitute teaching fee, but also brought her roommates to block me, trying to make me hand over all the money I had. In my despair, Julian came with bodyguards and saved me. He pulled me up from the ground and said he wanted to invite me to dinner. He blushed and said that his grades were not good and he was afraid of failing, asking me to help him with a last-minute review for the final exams. In fact, I knew his grades were very good, and this was just his way of helping me. I was attracted by his natural sunshine and cheerfulness. As if he had never experienced setbacks on the day I agreed to his confession, he took my hand and announced to everyone on campus, "This is my girlfriend, the top student beauty on campus." When I graduated, I gave up the opportunity to study abroad with government sponsorship. When I started working, I gave up the high-paying senior management job at a foreign big company with an annual salary of $1 million. I just wanted to be with Julian, simply hoping to marry him, have children, and grow old together until a year ago, the day Olivia, Julian's childhood friend from abroad, returned to China. Everything changed that day. Julian left me when I was sick for the first time, just to pick up Olivia at the airport. In the evening, he got drunk at the welcome dinner. He held Olivia's hand and refused to go back with me with red eyes. He asked, "Olivia, don't abandon me this time, okay?" Since then, I've been arguing with him because of Olivia. I wanted him to have a sense of boundaries, but he accused me of being too controlling, saying that I wouldn't let him have a friend. He even said sarcastically that Olivia and he had known each other since childhood, and I was the latecomer. Until 2 months ago, the day Olivia sent him a wedding invitation, he, who had rejected my 99 hints of marriage, suddenly put a piece of spiribus in my bowl and said sullenly, "Ava, why don't we get married too?" Shaking my head, I shook off the memories. My figure was stretched long in the setting sun, a solitary silhouette. In this world, I no longer have any relatives. After walking a few steps, the sky completely darkened. I was just about to take out my phone to call a taxi home. Then, I heard a familiar laugh and an affectionate voice in my ear. "Olivia, hold on tight, or I won't be responsible if I drop you later." Turning my head, I saw the entrance of a brightly lit bar. Julian was carefully carrying Olivia in a princess carry, spinning around like in an idol drama. Olivia was tightly hugging Julian's neck, her skirt fluttering, laughing heartily like a real princess. A group of people were cheering around them. "Come on, 3 more circles. Julian, come on. Don't forget to have a cross-arm drink with your wife after you stop. Olivia is so beautiful." When we played house as kids, Julian fought with all of us to be the prince. It's unexpected that the prince and the princess ended up together after all. Julian looked elated. He gently put down the slightly dizzy Olivia, as if she were a fragile porcelain. Then, he and Olivia took the glasses handed to them by someone nearby and skillfully intertwined their arms to drink. Instantly, the cheering around them grew louder, and people clapped their hands and shouted, "Kiss! Kiss!" Julian was a bit stunned and didn't move. Olivia, however, smiled and protected Julian. "Didn't you just say that was the last event? The wedding pranks have gone on for so long, everyone should go back now." But the next second, Julian put his arm around Olivia's waist and kissed her. He opened his eyes. His gaze clear and gentle, with a thick possessiveness in the depths of his eyes. The next second, he moved his eyes away. Slowly loosened his grip on Olivia, covered his head, and pretended to be drunk. "I want to go home. My head hurts so much." I saw clearly Julian's concern and careful love for Olivia. I also watched as he staggered to take out his phone and make a call. Then, my phone rang. From a few meters away. When Julian heard the ringtone and met my eyes, he straightened up. Everyone looked at us suspiciously and asked Julian, "Julian, who is this little beauty?" Julian's eyes flickered, and he mumbled, "She's the daughter of our family's nanny. My mom probably asked her to call me home for dinner." Olivia's eyes were full of pride. Pretending to be a virtuous wife, she deliberately said word by word, Oh, so she's the nanny's daughter. Then you must take good care of your young master." If it were me in the past, I would definitely have cried and asked Julian who he really loved in his heart. Now, I just felt bored and didn't even give them a glance. I turned around and got into the all-lane booked car I had just called. After getting home, I hadn't eaten all afternoon, and my stomach was twitching with pain, so I cooked myself a bowl of plain noodles. Just as I took to bites, I heard the clicking sound of high-heeled shoes outside. The next second, Julian kicked the door open. Seeing me eating, he frowned and snatched the chopsticks from my hand. "Abba, why did you turn around and leave just now? Do you know how embarrassed I was?" What's more unexpected is that Olivia also followed. I saw her looking worried, holding Julian's arm and saying gently, "Julian, Ava is a girl after all. Didn't you say you would talk nicely?" She turned to me and smiled, covering up the pride in her eyes. "Ava, don't be angry. Julian has had a bad temper since he was a child. He lacks patience with others except me, and you're also at fault. Julian was drunk. How could you leave him alone?" I found another pair of chopsticks, picked up a mouthful of noodles and put them in my mouth. They were tasteless. Without looking up, I replied to Julian, "Anyway, your wife is here to take care of you. Do you still need me?" Julian's face was as dark as ink, and the air pressure around him was terrifyingly low. He said coldly, "What wife? Ava, there should be a limit to your jealousy. Those are just some acquaintances in our circle. Olivia and I are just acting. Do you think I like drinking? I did it for you." I thought it was absurd. He was clearly enjoying being affectionate with Olivia. But now he looked so wronged looking at Julian. I stopped eating and asked back. For me? Julian said matter-of-factly. For you. My dad said that only if I marry Olivia will he agree to hand over the position of company heir to me, only then can I be with you and transfer you to the headquarters. Isn't all this for you and your career? Olivia frowned slightly, a hint of malice flashing in her eyes. But she pretended to agree on the surface. Julian is right, you didn't know, did you? To protect you. He deliberately rejected all the promotion applications you submitted over the years. He really has put a lot of thought into it for you. I was stunned. Suddenly, a chill shot up to the top of my head, making me shiver with cold. Over the years, I've overexhausted myself, trying to stand side by side with Julian through my own efforts. But now, Olivia told me that all my efforts had been in vain because of Julian. So, what about those plans I stayed up late to work on? The contracts I signed after drinking and socializing until I had a gastric hemorrhage? And the sacrifices I made by having no vacations and rarely seeing my mother? What did all these count for? My nose twitched, my eyes instantly reddened, and I asked Julian in a dry voice, is it true? Julian wasn't the least bit guilty. Instead, he nodded as if seeking praise. Yes, huevos. Don't worry, in the future, you'll be the president's wife of the Julian Group. You'll have everything you want. What are just a few promotion opportunities? I suddenly found it ridiculous. Julian always insisted on not making our relationship public. Even when we got married. He only asked me to invite my closest relatives and friends, not to make a big fuss. No one knew about our relationship at all. The so-called protection of me was just empty words. Everything was just to satisfy his desire to belittle and suppress me so that I would revolve around him. Now, I realized that the sweetness and sincerity I once thought were never pure. I shook my head and finally blurted out what was in my heart. Julian. Let's break up. Julian's eyes widened, and in an instant, looking at me in disbelief, his lips trembled. And he couldn't utter a single word. A flash of joy appeared in Olivia's eyes, and she quickly rebuked. Ava. You can't break up with Julian just because he has a good relationship with me. Julian really loves you. When we were on our honeymoon, his first reaction when he saw something strange was to buy it for you. She still didn't forget to mention the honeymoon to upset me. Olivia was really disgusting. With someone backing him up, Julian came to his senses and got even angrier. His handsome face seemed to be covered with a layer of ice. Eva, the more you talk, the more carried away you get. Don't you? Do you think you've got me under your thumb? Break up? Do you even have the right to mention breaking up to me? For the past 10 years, you've eaten my food, used my things, and I found you your job. What more do you want? He said this long string of words without hesitation, as if he had prepared them in advance. So he was actually so dissatisfied with me. Thinking that he was the one who had given the most. If it were me in the past, I might have argued with him about who was actually making the efforts, but now, looking at his furious appearance, I suddenly laughed. Thank you. Instantly, Julian's anger subsided a lot, and he mumbled. Thank me for what? The corners of my lips were still raised. And I said calmly, thank you for making me realize that in your eyes, I'm just a pitiful creature who can only survive by relying on you. After that, I took the eaten bowls and chopsticks into the kitchen and washed them clean under the tap. When I came out again, Julian was still standing there, motionless. Olivia handed him a glass of honey water and said softly, Julian, drink some honey water to sober up. You used to like it the most. For the first time, Julian absent-mindedly put the glass on the table. His face was flushed, and after a long while, he said softly to me, that's not what I meant. I ignored him, turned around, picked up the suitcase I had packed long ago, and walked out the door. As soon as I walked out, behind me, a glass was violently thrown at the doorframe and shattered. The viscous honey water splashed all over me. Then, a box was thrown to the ground. 2 ceramic rings inside fell out. I looked at the ceramic rings by my feet, feeling rather puzzled. Behind me, Julian roared with grievance. These are the rings I made specially for you abroad. I've always been thinking about you, Ava. Why are you so unreasonable and still want to leave home? I just found it funny. I didn't know what he was thinking. The inner rings of the rings were engraved with the capital letters of Julian and Olivia's names. Obviously, they were couple rings for him and Olivia. Yet, he had the nerve to say they were made for me. I didn't stop any longer. I dragged my suitcase and found a random hotel to rest for the night. Anyway, I was going to leave this city tomorrow. In the early morning, I washed up and went to the company. But I didn't expect that. As soon as I entered the company, I heard a burst of praise. Wow. Julian and Olivia, you two are really a perfect match. You're even wearing couple outfits. I'm so into your CP. Julian, Olivia. I'm also a fan of your CP. Can you let me take a photo? I saw Julian and Olivia standing in the middle of the company, arm in arm, accepting everyone's adulation, while Lucas was smiling obsequiously beside them. It turned out that they were the so-called people from the headquarters. Seeing me, Lucas introduced. Adashariva. This is Julian, the president of our headquarters. And Olivia, the vice president of the headquarters. They're here to inspect the expatriation situation. Julian deliberately turned his head away, and didn't look at me. The corners of his lips that had been raised just now flattened, and he just asked inferiorly. Who are the people being expatriated this time? Lucas found me, and two other people, and smiled. These three. Instantly, Huzzing fed out. Julian's expression froze, and his eyes were filled with a deep, inky color. A flash of schadenfreude appeared in Olivia's eyes. She immediately jumped out and rebuked in a shocked tone. How do you carry out your work? Don't you know that our company strictly prohibits expatriating married or people with children? Both the applicant and the approver will be punished. Lucas looked confused and blurted out an explanation. There are no married people. Julian's expression was cold. He pointed at me and said coldly. Didn't this person take a marriage leave some time ago? Lucas sighed and answered honestly. At first, she applied for a marriage leave. Maybe she made a mistake later. She changed it to a bereavement leave. Her mother passed away. Hearing this, Julian's face instantly turned deathly pale. His outstretched finger became stiff, and he looked at me in disbelief. As if thinking of something, his eyes flickered, and he asked in a low voice. Why didn't you tell me about Auntie's passing? I found it ridiculous. My mom had always regarded Julian as an important son-in-law, saying that it was my great fortune to marry Julian and always looking forward to the day when Julian would call her mom. But what my mom waited for was Julian marrying someone else and affectionately calling someone else's mother mom. I said lightly. There's no need, Julian. Does the headquarters even need to take care of the personal affairs of ordinary employees? Julian felt that something was gradually getting out of control, and this sense of unease was gradually expanding. He gritted his teeth, and his anger flared up again. Why is there no need? I'm her son-in-law, after all. Whose son-in-law are you? When everyone was looking at him in shock, the door of the company was pushed open. An elderly middle-aged man walked in. The fine lines at the corners of his eyes revealed a sense of sharpness. He was imposing even without getting angry. It was Julian's father, William, the person in charge of the Julian group. Everyone reacted and called out in unison. Hello, Chairman William. William nodded. He turned his head and asked Olivia with a smile. Olivia, I asked you two young couple to show your faces in each branch. What's going on? Did something happen? Remembering Julian's words just now, everyone present kept their mouths shut, not even daring to breathe loudly. Olivia's face turned green and then white with tears in her eyes. She forced a smile. Julian's friend is Ada's husband. Now that Julian heard Ava is going to be expatriated, he just wanted to stand up for his friend. Under the pressure of William's sharp gaze, Julian pursed his lips and remained silent, lowering his head and clenching his fists tightly. William's brows furrowed, and he said sternly, Is there really someone who dares to violate the company's taboos? I'd like to see who is so bold. I stepped forward and said calmly, William, it's a misunderstanding. I'm not married. I broke up with my ex-boyfriend amicably a long time ago. William slightly raised his eyebrows, looked me up and down, and then asked Julian, I've seen Ava's file. The girl is indeed unmarried. Did you make a mistake? She's about to be expatriated to date on to delay her flight. Flight? Julian's pupils suddenly constricted. Turning his head and seeing my indifferent expression, Julian's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly showed a somewhat panicked expression. He, who had always been steady in the company, exclaimed, Dad. It's not a friend at Esme. I'm Ada's husband. How could I be wrong? The marriage registration date is November 3rd. She must be lying. I registered with her in person that day. Everyone present swallowed hard. They didn't expect to witness such a scene of wealthy family grudges. Julian's expression relaxed a bit, thinking that this way I would have no reason to be expatriated. William's frown deepened. His gaze shifted between me and Julian. After a moment, he made a judgment. What nonsense are you talking? Even if she was your ex-girlfriend, your household register has been safely with me. What did you use to register the marriage with her? Julian, what? Who always had a good memory and never forgot anything, seemed to really forget that he had never registered the marriage with me. Instead, he questioned. How is that possible? Dad, don't lie to me. William's expression was serious, and his tone became impatient. I've told you to call me William and the company. No respect for elders. I've really spoiled you. Your household register has been locked in my safe, and when did you ever ask me for it? William helped Julian recall what happened that day bit by bit and continued. And I remember that day, you went to choose the wedding dress with Olivia. When did you have time to register the marriage? I think you're too tired recently and having illusions don't hinder Ada's future anymore. His words were harsh. More like a threat, warning Julian not to pester me anymore, and his reminder was obviously effective. Julian seemed to be stunned, as if he had been hit on the head. He finally remembered that he really didn't register the marriage with me that day because the moment he promised to propose to me, he had some regrets. So he dawdled to the Civil Affairs Bureau on purpose, pretended to forget to bring his household register, and then said to me with a guilty look, I'm sorry. Ava, can we register after the wedding? There aren't any auspicious days recently. Just then, he happened to receive a request from Olivia asking him to help try on the groom's suit. And then he left as if fleeing. Remembering everything, he turned around and stared fixedly at me with an indifferent face. His lips trembled, and he couldn't say a word. I said to William, Julian and I are strangers. I guess because I accidentally mistook Julian for my ex-boyfriend last time, which caused a little incident at Julian's wedding, so now he's playing a joke on me too. William nodded, looking at me with satisfaction. Ava, don't worry about the expatriation. I have high hopes for you. I nodded and turned to leave. Julian subconsciously reached out to stop me. Ava. But William looked serious and called out to Julian. Aren't you going to continue the inspection with Olivia? I still have to share the recent development achievements of the company at the headquarters today. Olivia finally moved. She shifted her venomous gaze away from me, and instead grabbed Julian's right hand, interlocking their fingers. At first, Julian struggled a bit, staring at me intently. But after a few tries, he gave in and turned to follow Olivia. I no longer cared about these grudges. I just wanted to escape from this city quickly. I went downstairs and took a taxi to the airport. On the way, I watched the familiar scenery flash by and secretly said goodbye in my heart, but I didn't expect that when I was checking in at the airport, Julian called me. I frowned. I didn't want to answer at first. Unexpectedly, due to my usual subconscious habit, my finger swiped to answer directly. Helplessly, I asked, Hello. What's the matter? The voice on the other end of the phone was rather noisy, like the howling wind. Julian spoke urgently and heavily. Ava. Don't leave yet. Wait for me. I'm about to arrive at the airport. Then, Manound. He hung up the phone directly. I still maintained the answering posture, with a puzzled look in my eyes. The airport? What was Julian doing at the airport? He was so afraid of William. How could he come after me? I wasn't that narcissistic to think that he couldn't let go of our old feelings, and was willing to give up the power and status he had strived for all his life. But to my great surprise, Julian really rushed to the airport, panting. He bent down and grabbed the handle of my suitcase, looking like a puppy about to be abandoned, and by its owner, pleading pitifully. Ava. Don't leave. I don't want the position of president anymore. I want to marry you. I'll go steal the household register and register the marriage with you right now. Okay? I knew that although Julian was 30 years old, because his family had protected him well, he was still like a child, thinking that as long as he put on a pitiful face and apologized, everyone in the world should forgive him. I used to be happy to see his late maturity, hoping that he would always be carefree. But now, I was extremely disappointed. He chased after me, pleading with a full face. Not because he loved me, but because he was afraid of losing me, a docile and obedient toy. But the world never goes as he wishes. It's time for him to grow up. Looking at Julian, my gaze was already extremely calm. Go back. Don't be joking. You've worked hard for the inheritance, right? For 10 years now, it's within your reach. How can you just give it up? The emotion that drove Julian to come to me, under the influence of adrenaline, gradually subsided. He tightened his grip on the handle of the suitcase, slightly pursed his lips, looking a bit stubborn, and said in a low voice, Ava, don't be expatriated, okay? As long as you stay in this city, you can ask me to do anything. Do you remember why I told you our company doesn't allow expatriation? Not long after I was born, my mom, a strong-willed woman, chose to go overseas to develop the market. She was gone for 5 years. When she came back, she was holding a 3-year-old boy in her arms, being held by a blonde-haired and blue-eyed man. From that day on, my dad went crazy, becoming paranoid and suspicious. He couldn't accept such betrayal. The reason why I resisted our marriage was that I was afraid. I was afraid that if one day you didn't love me, I would become like my dad. His words were unexpectedly honest and straightforward. I knew that this was his deepest concern buried in his heart. In fact, his mother had done even worse in order to get half of Julian's family property. She even secretly kidnapped Julian to threaten them. Later, although Julian was rescued, he also had a serious illness. The shadow of being abandoned had shrouded his life and become his nightmare. So, I had been enduring, carefully protecting his sensitive heart, hoping that he could feel and believe in my love. But the fact is that this person who claimed to be afraid of marriage accepted the wedding with Olivia quite well, and had a sweet face during the honeymoon trip with her. Perhaps even he himself didn't realize that he had an extraordinary dependence on and trust in this childhood friend he hadn't seen for many years. After a 10-year relationship, I wanted an amicable separation. So I still said in a kind tone, Julian, I can see that Olivia really likes you. You don't have to hide your feelings anymore. And I wish you all the best. I hope you two will have a harmonious marriage for 100 years. Julian anxiously argued. No, I just regard her as my sister. She was the one who saved me from my mother's hands back then. I admit that I had a little crush on her. But only a little bit. The person I really love is you, Ava. You can't leave me. Towards the end, Julian's voice suddenly became hoarse, tinged with a sob. I just found it ridiculous. Even now, he still wanted to act like an ostrich, thinking that burying his head in the sand could make everything go away. In his heart, the right to inheritance was more important than me, his father's recognition was more important than me. Olivia was more important than me. Even sometimes, his drinking parties and gatherings with friends were more important than me. We had long since drifted apart. But now, he still insisted that he loved me. At a stalemate, dozens of black-cloaked bodyguards suddenly entered the airport. Julian's father had come with Olivia to catch him. Seeing Julian's father with a serious face, Julian subconsciously showed fear in his eyes, and instantly let go of the handle of the suitcase. I sneered in my heart. This was the Julian I knew well, always a child who never grew up. Before Julian's father could speak, Julian swallowed hard and automatically moved a few steps away from me. He looked back every 3 steps and suddenly said firmly, Ava, I'll wait for you. The expatriation is only for 3 years. I'll wait for you at home. I just felt sarcastic and didn't even give him a glance. Who needed his waiting? Moreover, he still hadn't noticed that I had long since emptied all the things related to me at home, and there were no longer any traces of my life there. My home had disappeared on the day my mother passed away from illness. Turning around, I got on the plane and didn't look back. After landing, I had a meal with a female colleague who came to pick me up. This colleague, named Emma, had been expatriated a year earlier than me. We had met in the company before. As soon as she saw me, she patted me on the shoulder and said excitedly, Ava, you're finally here. Our boss has been asking me to poach you every day. I knew you didn't want to go abroad, so I didn't approach you. If I had known you weren't coming, I would definitely have contacted you. I curved the corners of my lips. In fact, this foreign big company had hinted to me several times whether I wanted to join their company. They even deepened their cooperation with our company and increased the number of expatriation quotas, hoping that I could go to their company. But at that time, I was so infatuated with love that I rejected all of them. Looking back now, I was really stupid. When we went to a Chinese restaurant for a meal, my phone on the table kept vibrating. It was Julian. I slightly frowned. Julian looking for me surely meant no good. Emma, however, looked shocked. Is this the little Julian from our head office? Is there something wrong? Hurry up and answer. Forced into a corner, I had to answer. On the other end of the phone, Julian, who was always calm, was trembling badly. Ava. Where are all your things at home? Didn't you say you would be with me for a lifetime? Why are you going back on your word? His voice was so loud that it was almost hysterical. I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Emma's knife and fork fell directly from her hand, making a clear sound as it hit the plates. He stared at me in disbelief. I just said coldly, Julian, from the moment my mother passed away, there has been no connection between us. After that, I hung up the phone. Thinking for a moment, I immediately blocked Julian. Looking up again, Emma was looking at me, seemingly eager to say something but holding back. I was a bit puzzled and asked, "What's wrong?" Emma stammered, "Eva, the boyfriend you always talked about is little Julian? But someone in the company group sent me a video before." I understood. Everyone in the company knew that I had a boyfriend I had been dating for 10 years. But they didn't know who he was. Some people even suspected that I was just imagining it as a single person. As for the scene of me bursting into Julian and Olivia's wedding, pleading with Julian to go to my mother's sickbed to explain, it was even filmed and became a laughingstock for the whole company. Now, facing Emma, I didn't bother to hide it and said frankly, "Yes, we dated before later. We thought we were not suitable and broke up." Emma seemed to have thought of something and looked at me sympathetically, patting my shoulder. "Ava, don't be too sad. Of course, we ordinary people can't compare with Miss Olivia later. I'll introduce you to a down-to-earth and nice guy." I couldn't help but laugh and shook my head. After officially starting work, I felt completely at ease. It was so refreshing that no one was trying to trip me up or deliberately make things difficult for me. As long as I put in the effort, I would get the corresponding rewards. A month later, I was promoted to a senior executive. This was a position that I couldn't obtain in China even after working for 10 years and submitting 5 promotion reports, and Julian frequently appeared on the front page of the news. Of course, he was still linked with Olivia, showing their love as a couple at various banquet venues, winning the reputation of being a well-matched and perfect couple from everyone. Presumably Julian had also thought it through and realized that the true love hid deep in his heart was Olivia. That was for the best. Now, when I saw their intimacy, I was completely calm and no longer had any emotional fluctuations. In a flash, 3 years passed. It was time for me to return to China for a work report, but I didn't expect that as soon as I landed, it was Julian and Olivia who came to pick me up. Julian was wearing sunglasses, looking arrogant when he saw me. He turned around and left. Olivia, on the other hand, still had her gentle mask on and said with a hidden sting, "Ava, you seem to have had a better life abroad in these 3 years. You even look fatter. I'm afraid you've been having so much fun that you've forgotten about home." Since they came to pick me up in the name of the headquarters, I couldn't decline and followed them. I secretly touched my 3-month pregnant belly, which was not very noticeable in my winter clothes. Thinking that I wasn't fat, I replied perfunctorily, "Yeah, I've had a good time." When we reached the underground garage, Julian took the driver's seat first. Olivia directly opened the passenger seat door and sat in. When she was fastening her seatbelt, she suddenly said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Ava. I forgot that you should be sitting in the passenger seat. I'll get out right away." Julian snorted. Why should we spoil her bad habits? Let her sit in the back seat. I felt confused. Was it popular in China recently to let guests sit in the passenger seat? Otherwise, why would Olivia offer me the passenger seat? But since Julian had said so, I nodded, opened the door, and sat in the back seat. Julian's hand gripping the steering wheel suddenly tight, and his knuckles turning white. His pupils were dark, and he gritted his teeth, saying, "Ava, didn't you used to say that the passenger seat was the exclusive position for the girlfriend, and you hated it when others sat there?" I was even more confused. "Ah, yes, Olivia is your wife. It's perfectly fine for her to sit in the passenger seat." Julian's face dark, and even more he drove in silence, and for a long time, there was a suffocating calm in the car. I took out my phone and quickly reported my safety to my husband, afraid that he would worry about me. Yes, in these 3 years, introduced by Emma, I got to know and fell in love with Henry, a male colleague from the same company. He was also expatriated from China to abroad. Like me, he had lost all his family members and didn't plan to go back. Perhaps it was a mutual understanding or a need to find comfort together. The two of us always had endless things to talk about. A year later, we got married. By the time I returned to China, I was already 3 months pregnant. But he still had business to deal with, so I didn't ask him to come with me, seeing me giggling while holding my phone in the rearview mirror. Julian was so angry, and he gritted his teeth. He cleared his throat and said, "Ava, aren't you going to ask me how I'm doing now?" Before I could speak, he started talking to himself. "Last month, my dad stepped down and handed over the company to me completely. Now, the company is mine." Was he showing off to me? I got it. This was the so-called comparison with the ex-partner to see who was doing better. My husband replied to my message. "As long as my wife has landed safely, has the baby been good today? I'll come to you as soon as I finish what I'm doing." There was a bear emoji making a heart shape at the end. I curved the corners of my lips and sent a heart emoji back. In a good mood, I casually said to Julian, "Congratulations, Julian." Unexpectedly, the next second, Julian suddenly hit the brakes. I lurched forward, but luckily I managed to brace myself with my hands. I quickly stroked my belly to soothe the baby. Before I could question him, Julian stared at me intently, seemingly extremely angry. Olivia's eyes flitted between me and Julian for a moment. Then she said, "Ava, why are you being so polite? You're not still angry because of my good relationship with Julian, are you? Julian has missed you a lot these years." He deliberately added more overseas trips. "Hoping to find you." Julian interrupted her directly, but said to me plaintively, "Olivia, why are you telling her so much? Some people are heartless. They Ray still jealous after all these years, such a narrow-minded person." Huh? Who was jealous? Me. I was still in a daze. Taking the opportunity, Olivia asked with a smile, "Ava, you're getting more and more beautiful. You must be quite popular abroad these years, right?" I replied vaguely. "Not bad. I'm already married." Beep. The car horn was punched hard, suddenly emitting a long and sharp sound. Julian turned his head, his eyes bloodshot, and asked hoarsely, "What did you say?" I looked at him directly and said lightly, "I got married abroad." Olivia's eyes lit up, and the corners of her lips couldn't stop rising. Ava. Everyone saw how much you loved Julian back then. You can't joke about marriage." But Julian seemed to be thinking, and then he suddenly smiled with a strange curve of his lips. Dedo. I didn't expect that after 3 years abroad, you've learned to lie all right. Now that you're back, don't leave the promises I made to you can all come true now." I didn't know what to say. Since he didn't believe me, then so be it. Julian was the kind of person who was stubborn, and talking to him was just a waste of my life. After arriving at the company, I quickly reported the results of my expatriation over the years. Taking advantage of the time when Julian was taking Olivia to a meeting, I went to the personnel department. Then, let out a low sigh. I took out my resignation application. The employee in the personnel department looked at me in shock. After all, those who chose to be expatriated became senior executives when they came back and were reluctant to leave. He was seeing someone submitting a resignation application after returning from expatriation for the first time, so he just stammered, "Okay, had info fell riot session. I'll submit it for you. You should get a reply within 3 working days." I just smiled faintly. Turning around, I took a taxi to my mother's cemetery. This was also the purpose of my trip back. On the way, the villagers were still pointing at me. "Hey, this kid has been gone for 3 years. Why did she suddenly show up? Was she released?" "Don't talk nonsense. Her husband said she went abroad to do big things. She's really promising." Husband? Who were they talking about? I didn't pay attention to the villagers' words. After all, their words often contained fabricated elements. In front of my mother's grave, I was surprised to find that the tombstone was extremely clean, as if it was often wiped. Without thinking too much, I knelt down, presented a bouquet of flowers, then lit 3 incense sticks and bowed several times. When I stood up again, I stroked my mother's tombstone and murmured, "Mom, I haven't come to see you for 3 years. Did you miss me? I came to tell you that you have a son-in-law, and you'll soon have a grandson." I know you don't like leaving home. But my career is in a foreign country. So it may be a long time before I can visit you again, but don't worry. I'll come back whenever I have the chance. A gentle breeze suddenly blew. It was like my mother's usual gentle touch behind me. There was suddenly the sound of footsteps. Julian was panting when he saw me, his steps slowed down. He smiled with a curve of his lips, looking rather proud. Ava, I knew you'd be here. Then he skillfully took out a handkerchief and wiped the dust off my mother's tombstone. I was a bit stunned. Have you been taking care of my mother's cemetery these years? Julian lowered his eyes, his long and thick eyelashes covering his eyes. So I couldn't see his expression. He just said in a low voice, I heard from the villagers about Auntie. I'm sorry. I also know you've been wrong. It's normal for you to want to escape from me because you're sad. I really didn't choose to be expatriated because I wanted to escape from him as he imagined. I said frankly. Thank you, but I chose to be expatriated for myself, for my youth, and for my efforts. Julian suddenly hugged me tightly, his hands restraining me, and said sullenly, Why are you still being so stubborn? Don't worry. I'm in charge of the company now. And Olivia and I are about to head towards a marriage-breaking and divorce scenario. At that time, I'll register the marriage with you and make our relationship public immediately. I thought Julian's mind might be different from normal people. We hadn't been in touch for 3 years. How could he think of making our relationship public? How could he think that we were still in a romantic relationship? I pushed him away directly, afraid of pressing the baby. Julian didn't realize how strange his train of thought was at all. Before I could speak, he pulled me away. Bala, I prepared a celebration banquet for you at the branch company. Come back with me now. Along the way, Julian kept talking to himself, leaving me no room to interrupt. After arriving at the company, I found that at some point, ribbons and banners had been arranged in the hall to celebrate my return. Olivia wasn't very happy, her face tightly drawn. The moment she saw Julian, she let out a sigh of relief and squeezed over with a smile. Julian, you're finally here. Everyone has been waiting for you for a long time. Those employees who had once looked down on me and made things difficult for me either lowered their heads or, as if those past events had never happened, heaped excessive praise on me. Ava, I could tell you were a talent long ago. Now it turns out I was right. Ava, do you remember me? I used to be a member of your team. Back then, I thought our team leader was so capable that she was bound to achieve great success. Julian had a smile on his lips, evidently quite satisfied. Until an employee from the personnel department handed him a piece of paper with a conflicted look. He looked impatient. This is a time for celebration. Can't you talk about things during working hours? Even though he said this, he still took the paper, and then his face changed dramatically. His lips moved slightly. Resignation application. The next second, Julian's gaze was firmly fixed on me. His mind suddenly became extremely chaotic, and he casually put the resignation application aside. But I saw it and gently reminded him. Julian, please sign it. I'm flying back to abroad tomorrow. Julian stared at me in disbelief. Leaving tomorrow? Abba, hada. Don't you want your future? I was a bit speechless. Julian, my husband is abroad. I don't want to develop in China anymore. There should be no problem with that, right? Seeing this, Olivia couldn't help but add fuel to the fire. Abba, do you really have a family abroad? In that case? Julian, right? Why don't we? She didn't finish her words. Julian's face instantly turned dark. Ava, stop making trouble. You submitted the resignation application just to hint that I should promote you, right? I've already decided to transfer you to the headquarters as vice president. What else are you not satisfied with? Olivia, who currently held the position of vice president, twitched the corner of her lips, clearly very dissatisfied. Just as the situation was at a stalemate, a gentle and refined male voice came. Is this the place where Ava works? The moment I heard this voice, I immediately walked towards the door. It's my husband's voice. I walked quickly towards him and said in surprise, Honey, why did you come so quickly? Henry, who saw me walking quickly, was startled and supported me, reminding me, Ava, slow down. Be careful with the baby. Instantly, Julian was stunned. Everyone in the company was stunned. Some people reacted quickly and immediately laughed and flattered. Ava, I didn't expect you to be married and pregnant. You, Ray, really a winner in life. We're all envious. Yeah, your husband is so handsome, Ava. You're really lucky. Henry's ears turned bright red, but he still raised his head and held my hand tightly, as if firmly declaring his sovereignty. Blah. I wanted to give you a surprise also. I wanted to come and see our mom. Julian finally came to his senses. But he no longer had his previous calm and confident look. He seemed to have lost his rationality. He took a step forward and tried to break Henry's hand that was supporting me. You're lying. Ava is my wife. Did she hire you as an actor to deliberately make me angry? I was so afraid that this crazy Julian would do something that I subconsciously reached out to stop him. Unexpectedly, my hand hit his cheek. Instead, there was a clear slapping sound. Henry protected me behind him and looked at Julian warily. His brows furrowed, and Olivia had already rushed forward to protect Julian, asking repeatedly, Julian, does it hurt? Julian just covered his red-cheeked face, his body trembling till lines of tears streamed down from his eyes without warning. He said hoarsely, Ava, tell me, it's all fake, right? You clearly said that you would only love me in this life. I looked at him with extremely cold eyes. Julian, I'm telling you seriously for the last time. We broke up long ago and have no connection now. My husband is Henry. He loves me. And I love him. After that, Henry protected me and carefully left the company this time. Julian didn't chase after us. In the evening, I took Henry to the hotel to rest, planning to take him to the hometown to sweep the tombs the next day. Early the next morning, I saw the news that the resignation application had been approved on the system. At the same time, I saw the news that Julian and Olivia were showing their love publicly, planning to have a baby next year. Their CP fans on the internet were extremely excited. Julian sent me a message out of nowhere. Ava, I'll wait for the day when you discover your true feelings and come back to me. Only when you lose me will you know what regret is. I felt speechless. He seemed to have delusions. After taking my husband to sweep the tombs, I bought tickets to go abroad without delay. As a result, within a few months, I saw the news that Julian's company was merged by Olivia, and he was directly kicked out of the power center, falling from a proud son of heaven to an ordinary person. Since then, I never heard from him again. 7 months later, I successfully gave birth to a 7th daughter. Holding this soft and tender little life, my heart was filled with warmth. Perhaps this is the definition of happiness.